Good morning and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Michelle Maloney, and I'm the co-founder and national convener of the Australian Earth Laws Alliance. Today is one of our final webinars for this year, and we're delighted to have two guests from India, who I'll introduce in just a moment, talking about not only a remarkable bioregional mapping project they've been involved with, but how it's been beginning to be a powerful tool in helping to decolonise the way boundaries are seen and understood. So I'm really looking forward to our webinar today. First, I'd like to acknowledge country. Here in Australia, it's, I feel, an important tradition to acknowledge that we live, work and play on the custodial lands of different Aboriginal peoples across this continent. Here I am on Kabi Kabi country north of Brisbane, and I'd like to acknowledge the elders of this land and also the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples across this beautiful part of the world. It's become a bit of a Zoom tradition inside AELA events, at least. We invite you to pop into the chat where you are, whose country you're on. And because we are interested in all things earth-centred, if you have met or seen or had a conversation with any wonderful plants or animals today, please feel free to pop that in the chat. It helps people to liven up our online discussions. I can certainly say to you that I was out in my garden this morning saying hello to all the bees. People who know me know I'm obsessed with bees. We had a giant carpenter bee in the garden this morning, fluffy and cute. So please do think about the living world in our session today. Again, before I introduce our speakers, please do pop your questions into the chat throughout. Today we have Nisha will be speaking first, and then Manu, and then I'll be having a bit of a discussion with them because I'm so excited about this project, and then we'll open up to your questions that you've popped into the chat. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Nisha. I'm just going to give you the spotlight, literally and figuratively. Nisha, welcome and thank you so much for joining us. In our webinar today, you're going to tell us all about this amazing project. So Nisha, I might hand over to you, and please do introduce yourself. I know you wear many hats. I've met Nisha and Manu through the work of the Southeast Asia or the South Asia Bioregionalism Working Group, which I'm a huge fan of. Wonderful work. So over to you, Nisha. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm super excited to be here. I'm coming in from the west coast of India, a place called Goa, where I live. Yeah, it's morning here. We had a great time in the morning. And just to go with the odd thread, this morning I noticed that hornbills, which are really beautiful birds, have started coming back after a long rainy monsoon that we had. So that's pretty exciting. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, yeah, so I am going to present some of the work of the South Asia Bioregionalism Working Group, and I'm really excited for this opportunity and for having this space. To give a little bit of background, we are part of the South Asia Bioregionalism Working Group. It is a voluntary working group of members from different walks of life, different disciplines from across many parts of South Asia. And this particular piece of work that we are going to present is part of a publication that Manu and I did co-led together. And it is and in this first phase of this work, it's part of a continuing work. We have mapped about 70% of the nation state boundary of India. And we're moving towards doing all of South Asia. So this has been a very interesting journey for us because South Asia is a place that has been torn apart by colonial regimes and boundary formation. And in these last 300-400 years, a lot of boundaries and traditions and ways of living have been lost. And so we started our journey of this research by starting from the point of entry of the British regime and then peeling backwards. It was quite like a detective journey where we had to find pieces that started making sense and then keep pulling at threads until a bioregional sort of identity and boundary started emerging. It was a very contextual approach, and I would say it was very emergent, intuitive, and informed by lore. We had to go beyond the conventional sort of mainstream resources that are acceptable in Western science and also look at things that were there far before colonization. A little bit about the context of the boundaries of South Asia. It is actually a very, as some of you may know, we have India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Tibet, and Afghanistan in some sense, and Sri Lanka, which is part of the South Asian region. And many of these boundaries between these nations were formed very violently through colonial boundary drawing. And much of the history of these boundaries were also very violent. And therefore, even 75 years and more from these days, we still have a lot of conflict, a lot of very harsh fencing and things like that, which not just separate human communities, but separate natural systems, separate biodiversity, migration, separate soil formation and fungal networks, etc. So, it's far more than what we see at the surface. And what's also really important to know is also that because that it is part of one region, which is between the Arabian Sea and the Himalayan mountain ranges, a lot of things that happen in one place affect the other places. And this is also something, everything from pollution to flood, we need to work with each other. So I just want to take you through sort of the ethos and the foundation of our research. So a bioregion is more than just a geographic or ecological unit. It is a living, interconnected web of relationships between land, water, plants, animals, and human communities. It embodies ancestral knowledge, cultural practices, and reciprocal responsibilities to sustain life in harmony with nature. So we also work with indigenous worldviews, which see bioregion as a place of deep kinship, where people are not separate from the land, but are active participants in its health and continuity. So, when we were looking at bioregions, we were also looking at governance, food systems, storytelling methods, spiritual practices, and rooted into these specific landscapes and ecosystems. So, bioregionalism, with far beyond the term and the word, has existed in this region for millennia. So we also had to really take that into account and ensure that we consciously stayed away from mainstream definitions of what it is. A little bit about our research approach. We did it there were two aspects of it, and one was the natural system and what were the natural layers, soil, topography, water systems, river basins, etc., which form climate and also how new adaptations and changes in climate were. So that was one set of data or research points we had to work with. The other set was also what were the intangible, the cultural, the historical sort of evidences that exist in this land, right? So like with the eco-regional aspects, boundaries were easier to understand because there's so much of satellite data and things that allow us to work with it. But the other part of it, which is the cultural intangible aspects, was a big part of our research, including languages, including agroecological traditions, festivals, deities, and the specific kind of spiritual traditions. All of this led to what separated two bioregions or what unified two regions into a bioregion. And then we had to find these intersects and map these layers. And it started very beautifully starting to overlap and intersect. So we used a lot of pre-colonial resources, including mythology, folklore, memoirs by various kings and philosophers, travelogues by early visitors like Megasthenes and Ptolemy, and various other things so even from cultural and tourism websites of today, there were evidences of these historical points. So, just to sort of give you an example of how some of these processes kind of played out in our research process, I will just take you through some maybe one or two bioregions and how it emerged. So just as when the British were starting their regime in India, they started having these administrative districts, and they were the ones that started creating these administrative districts. And the districts remain till today. And post-independence, when we started forming internal states within India, we used predominant languages, which also meant erasure or suppression of many thousands of languages, but predominant languages and grouping of districts together based on language into forming states. So this now is the basis of how the Indian political administrative units are currently functioning as well. So if we look at this green line on the left on the peninsular part of India, that is Tamil Nadu, a state. But the purple blotch almost towards the west of it is bioregion that emerged, which is Kongu Mandalam. So what I'm showing on the right side are some of the very ancient maps in different languages. That's another challenge in India because we have all these languages, and between us, we didn't know all of it. We knew only a few and we had to work with that. So that was some of the limitations. And these are two, like, as you can see, these are not acceptable in some of the mainstream resource sources, as it's hard to even find these kind of maps. But this particular bioregion emerged from the clue that led to it was actually a political dissent movement where people were asking for separate statehood within India, but a separate internal state called Kongu Mandalam. And then unraveling that, we discovered it has a whole history of a very specific identity. And as you can see from the terrain map on the west, we have, on the west, we have these Western Ghats. It's a very ancient mountain system. And then, as you can see, it kind of branches out and goes towards the east, and it's called the Eastern Ghats. And between the Western Ghats and the Eastern Ghats, there is actually this little cradle kind of a place formed, which was also a pass. So people used to cross, the Western Ghats were hard to cross back in the day. So people used to use this region to cross, and this region is mostly grasslands and kind of dry deciduous. So it had these nomadic communities, pastoral communities, and so they lived in this region nomadically. But because of the nature of it being a pass between the Western Ghats to the Eastern Ghats, it was also the pathway for massive migrations. Everything from elephants to butterflies migrate from the Western Ghats to the Eastern Ghats seasonally. It's twice a year at minimum. And it's always through this region. So these pastoral communities also had this history of coexisting with this kind of migration. So, and that is how this region's history is and the identity is. So therefore, like I was saying, we looked at a lot of cultural and social factors and history and intangible heritage. And it started forming a region which perfectly then started also overlapping with the natural way in which a region was formed. So that first example was how within the state, there could be a different bioregion. So this is how a bioregion has been torn apart by two states. So again, on the west coast of India, the little blue sort of triangle that you can see, that is a bioregion, Tulunadu. But two states, Kerala and Karnataka, almost bifurcate this region. And that is because of the predominant language as a methodology of creating states, right? But Tulunadu is a very, very, very distinct sort of identity. And the very colorful map in the middle is the various languages that are being spoken here. And again, these are only predominant languages. A lot of the indigenous, the tribal languages and the sub-languages and the thousands and thousands of dialects are missing from this map. But as you can see, there's a little yellow blotch of a language called Tulu. And that was an indication of this being a separate bioregion. And further sort of research and investigation led to understanding of how this whole region on the western side of the Western Ghats, like I'm from Kerala, grew up there, now I live in Goa, which is further high up on the western coast. So in this entire region, in many ways, ecological factors are quite similar. We have similar rainfall patterns, similar soil conditions, and we're between the mountains and the sea. So in many ways, a lot of the same species of plants and animals, there are variations, of course, but largely it's similar. Yet, cuisines and agroecological traditions are very distinct. So this Tulunad had a very, very distinct traditions that we started seeing, festivals, deities, spiritual traditions between Kerala, the next district, which is just south of it, and the part of the same district of today, which is north of Tulunad. And one of the reasons that we realized that was back then there was a river, which is seen in the photograph, which was really hard to cross. And as a result, this is way back, isolated kind of a culture started developing. And though they are the same ingredients and the same kind of plants and animals and fish, the cuisine and the traditions and everything started evolving in a very specific way. And today, because of the bifurcation between the states, like for example, during COVID, we really saw it becoming a problem because these people move across this border on a daily basis, and ancestral land is divided between these two states. So when COVID happened and state boundaries were shut down, families were literally separated, and both regions depend on each other. So this is a great example of why bioregionalism makes sense for cultural identities as well as like human governance, right? So each bioregion has a specific story as to how it emerged through our research, and it was a collection of many factors that made sense together for us to delineate it as a boundary. And we are looking at the South Asia Bioregionalism Working Group. We're looking at bioregionalism, amongst many other things, as a path towards decoloniality, to reclaim our own narratives. Or when I say our, it's again generalizing in the narratives of each region, because the South Asia is incredibly diverse and there's layers and layers of history, thousands of years worth of history, of trade, of culture, of invasions, of peace, of, so all of it has led to this, and at the end of it, the British colonization and then the nation building after that has led to a lot of homogenization. But this is a way to reclaim narratives, and it's a way to recognize indigenous resources to a particular region, to value the intuitive knowledge that people hold beyond what is documented and considered accessible. And of course, there is so much of ancestral wisdom and traditions that we honor, along with local language, local traditions. And by doing this methodology that we devised, it was a very important step in overcoming a lot of the limitations imposed on even researchers and academics by Western science, because of what is considered a resource and what is considered a way of publishing. So this is in a way a path towards decolonizing our regions.
Nisha, just want to let you know you're probably over by about a minute, but if you'd like to, I could listen to you all day, but yes.
Sorry, this is the last slide. Okay. So the other part is also that bioregionalism is a continuation of indigenous evolution, because there was a way in which land and communities were evolving, and it just got sort of, cut off when the colonial regime set in. So this is a way of also healing colonial trauma and reviving indigenous identities. It is a way to decolonize our territory and also accept this fluidity in boundaries. Not all boundaries are steadfast. It could be seasonal. It could be different for different communities, even though it's the same bioregion. And so we are using this as a path towards sort of developing policies and governance methodologies that enable us to work with nature and work with natural systems, and natural systems include human community systems, and recreating a path towards stewardship. The photo on the left is not from India. I just thought it was really interesting it's a stick map of the Marshall Islands. It's an indigenous map of the ocean and how people understood currents. So, it's just to say that there's so much knowledge out there with indigenous communities, with people who are stewarding the land for thousands of years. And this is sort of the limitations imposed by Western science, that something like this is not considered valuable data anymore. Yeah, that's it for me. So thank you very much. I just want to leave you with these last sort of thoughts, that this is a way for us as part of humans, as part of the natural interdependent system. In this bioregionism is how it has created territorial boundaries in our own evolutionary journey. Thank you. That's me.
Thank you so much, Nisha. That is just wonderful. The maps, the stories, the decolonizing the way people are thinking and looking at the world. We'll come back shortly for some questions. And I know that you'll be sharing Manu's slides, so I might introduce him, and I'll remove the spotlight from you and put the spotlight on him. There we go. So thank you so much, Nisha, and welcome, Manu. It's lovely to have you join us here online in Australia, but also we have folks joining us from around the world, actually.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you, Nisha. Thank you, Michelle, and happy to be here. Greetings to everyone who is listening. So basically, this was a initial research which we had done, Nisha and me together. The starting point of this was that currently all the administrative units which we have in the country are those which were given to us by our colonial rulers. So the first, district, these administrative units were the districts. And the first, district was formed in this country in the south and in a place called Salem and as early as 1792. Right. So now here gradually the system spread all across the country. And as the trigonometrical survey covered the whole country bit by bit, this enabled the district system to spread in particularly what was known as British India. The other part of the country was the parts which were ruled by the native Indian kingdoms, but gradually the district system became dominant. Now, prior to the district system, we had other nomenclatures such as prants, mozas, which were basically more related to the homogeneity of a particular landscape. Okay. Now, what happens is that as we go on in time, we have got at this point of time 741 administrative districts. And all our data, all our statistics, they have to do with human indices or with the revenue or whatever, they are collected on the basis of the district spatial unit. And so, over the last 200 years of the district system, the system has become completely engraved in the Indian mind space, and we are unable to think beyond it or what was or see the value in what was there before it. This particular exercise has been an attempt to go below the layer of the districts and see how what kind of regions we had prior to the districts. Now, here I would just make a little detour. You see, natural conditions are what give rise to differentiation in the landscape. So, a particular area would have a particular ecology, its own distinct vegetation, flora, fauna, topography, climate, and so on. And these in turn would reflect in the cultural expressions of the people of that area. Now, cultural expressions could be in the form of language, in the form of architecture, dance, costume, and in living in harmony with the natural conditions of that area. And these nomenclatures, the regional nomenclatures, they came up over time, over centuries. Okay, it was not that they were given on a map, but it was, you knew it. And what would happen is that if you went to another part of the country, you would explain that I am from such and such a country. That doesn't mean a nation, but it does mean that you are from a particular region. And because of that distinction, you carried with you pride in belonging to a particular area, which is certainly not so in the district system. And even now, a lot of the veteran citizens, senior citizens, they retain in their memories the names of regions, and they are still in circulation, of course, not to the same extent as earlier, and of course, losing ground all the time. But the names of regions which they use, they are specifically related to the natural conditions of a particular area. Now, therefore, since nature gives rise to different languages, you describe the same, say, the word for water in different regions is different. Okay. So now you have this, then it gives a linkage that the languages map could be coincident with the bioregions. Now, this is a hypothesis which in actual practice held fairly well. If we go on, we'll find that I spoke about the Desh earlier, that which country do you belong to? And that is so even in other places. And I just mentioned about, if you read this story from R.L. Stevenson. Nisha, can you go back a little? Yeah, a little further. Yeah, yeah. In the novel Kidnapped by R.L. Stevenson, they refer to different countries, such as MacGregor country. MacGregor country belongs to the MacGregor clan. Okay, so each clan had its territory, which was known as country. But obviously, it did not mean a nation. Yeah, Nisha, we can go down further. So the same concept held over here also. And so you had these names. Now here I show you that how the architecture varies because of the natural conditions. On the left, you see desert village, completely built by the material at hand and hugging the ground, designed for keeping the internal environments cool. On the right, in the hills, you have stone and wood, and that's a particular Khat style of architecture. Let's go down further. In the cold desert of Ladakh, right below, you see a monastery hugging the hillside, and again drawn entirely from the colors and materials of that region and the building style, which is the structural style, which is required by the topography of that area. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, go on. Yeah, so now here again, you find that the costumes, the dress in different areas, again, it varies entirely according to the conditions, the materials, the vegetable dyes, which are available in that particular area, and also the expressions given by of hierarchy, which is, you can see, shown by the feathers on the headgear. If we look in the lower photograph, so this is in the Western Desert. And here again, you find that people are far more covered in order to escape the heat of the sun. But here again, the material of the dyes is different because it comes from different plants. And as we go on earlier, we draw ornamentations in different parts of the country from the vegetation which is available over there. So marble inlay work, top right, the Madhubani painting, which reflects the fauna of that region, or the tiger dance or the yak dance in different parts of the country. Now here there's an observation that the country, and it's a pretty large country, where tribal societies still exist, there the expression, there the closeness of their natural region and culture, those linkages are very strong still. And in fact, that has actually led to certain political movements whereby new spatial units have been carved out around the culture of that particular region. So it sort of reverts to the concept of bioregion based upon natural and cultural homogeneity. Now, when we went about this work, we looked at a whole lot of literature. We even looked at poetry because there were some poems which described the geography in earlier times. We looked at a lot of historical work, and we also looked at the district gazetteers, the original district gazetteers written by colonial administrators. Sorry. And but even so, I think we barely touched the surface of the immense amount of material which is available. Now, that would, of course, take a long time and maybe another phase of research. But then we went on to look at the various maps which were available. And so the first thing which we did was, since we cannot escape the district system now, we drew up a map of India which showed each and every district as existing at present. And on that, our intention was to overlay the bioregions which we could describe. Nisha, we can move on a little further. So now the objective was that if we can ensure in future that political boundaries coincide with ecological boundaries, then it would be a kind of a force multiplier in terms of development. If the political decisions are taken on ecological, they also should have some ecological basis as well. And that would also require that the unique ecology of a particular bioregion is conserved in the development process. And all that would lead to greater indigenization of food resources, use of local materials rather than everybody across the country following steel and cement and concrete, and the culturing of the native biota, the flora, so that the region's distinct natural characteristics are dominant. Next. So here is the map of India, which is showing about 700 of the district administrative units in the country. And on this, we have overlaid the information which we were able to find. We have not been able to cover the entire country partially because of a lack of time and resources, and also basically which led to not being able to complete all the research. Next. So here is the languages map of India. And the languages map of India was one good guide for us. And actually, these are only the official languages. India has got hundreds of dialects, and every 20 kilometers or so, the dialect begins to change again, which is because of variation in natural conditions. Now, all that would take a very long time, and one would actually have to detail this languages map to a much greater extent. But this is surely a very great pointer to the bioregions. Next. Now, here is the modern agroclimatic zones map of India. And this has a fair coincidence with the languages map of India, and which reinforces the thesis that languages and ecology have a deep relation. Next, please. And so, from all our research, we were able to come up with these regions. The white regions are those where we have not been able to go identify the bioregions. But wherever we have put in color, we have got the bioregions which are still in the memories of people. Next. Now, I'll just show you areas, make a point over here. Now, this is the western state of Rajasthan. And the left side map shows you the regions, the bioregions, which were historically in the minds of people. So where do you come from? I come from Marwar. Okay, and you come from Mewar. Okay, so that was the way it was. Now on the right, you have got the modern scientifically derived agroecological map regions. Okay, agroecological regions map of the same state. So based upon the subclimatic region conditions, based upon the soil conditions, based upon the moisture conditions, flora, fauna, and so on. Now, if you look, there's a great coincidence. If you look at the line running from just in between from east to southwest, okay, you'll find that exists in both of the maps. And the reason for that is that this is the Aravalli mountain chain, east of which the area gets a lot of rainfall. But the Aravalli mountain chain acts as a barrier to the monsoon winds. And west of that is all arid zone. Okay. And in fact, the Thar Desert over there. And if you take this region, see Hadoti in the left map, okay, that is shown on the southeast, Kadoti, and you see exactly the same thing on the scientific map, which is zone 5. Absolutely the same, right? And you'll find a fair coincidence in the other regions as well. So those which were in the left map, which were distinguished by people on the basis of their natural differences, is exactly reflected through science as well. So now each of these regions on the left, they each have a different dialect or language. So you can have Marwari over here, Mewari over here, you can speak a different language here or here, and so on. And so each of them are having their own languages or dialects. Nisha, next please. Now here's one more region I'm showing you. This is the state of Uttarakhand, both this entire thing. But within it, there is a division. And so this area is known as Garhwal division. And this area is the Kumaon division. And if you go on the ground, you'll find very clearly language differences, floral faunal differences, topographical differences. And so you'll find that there's a clear distinction. And so the Kumaoni people are proud of their country as the Garhwalis are proud of theirs. Okay. So the languages and the culture, they coincide with the natural conditions on this side and very distinctively in Kumaon as well. Next, please.
Sorry to interrupt, Manu, just to let you know, we've only got about 13 minutes left for the whole webinar. So whenever you're ready to wrap up, we can have some discussion if you like.
Yeah, I'm done almost. So
Sorry to interrupt.
basically now, where have we gone? So yeah, so that's the last slide. And I think I've made my point. But now how do we go forward from this is, and this is just a proposal. It's a very, hard task to get this done, is that the current modern day districts cannot be, simply obliterated. But what can be done is that the districts which constitute a particular bioregion, as we have identified, they can act together on ecological lines for that particular bioregion while retaining the, constituent modern districts so that, we have ecological dimension coming into play. Right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I hate to interrupt. That was really wonderful. Thank you so much, Nisha and Manu. And I'm just going to spotlight you both so we can bring you forward. Hang on. Oh, sorry. Now that you've got your video up, there we can do it. Fabulous. Look, thank you so much. I'm getting comments in the private chats as well about how much people have enjoyed watching this presentation, the maps, the stories, and this deep thinking about the past and the future with the cultural connections and such. Oh, there I am. So a couple of quick questions for you both. Actually, just a quick reflection from me. I love the fact that you, Manu, were talking about people saying, to which country do you belong? And that is such a practice here in Australia with Indigenous peoples. The colonial project in Australia is only 230 years old in some parts of the south of Australia, and much, much younger, like 100 years, 80 years, 60 years up in the Northern Territory. So a lot of people, that's the first thing they say. Which country are you from? Whose country do you have? So it's lovely for an Australian who's interested in these things to hear this from your discussions. I was very interested in this idea, which I'm personally passionate about in Australia too, which is rethinking current political boundaries so that at least as a step for the constructs we have to connect more deeply to nature. Can you talk a little bit more about what you guys would like to do next with this report and this analysis to help people either reconnect with their bioregions or to suggest, say, to governments and others that they start to rethink how they connect their boundaries? I mean, is this a report that you plan to do more on? Are you going to present it to governments, or are you really focused on gathering community stories?
Nisha, then may I? Yeah. So, what has happened is that there are a lot of political movements in the country, particularly in the tribal areas, which are still very close to their, native conditions. So if you look at the northeastern part of the country, we have got states, provinces, which are actually carved out on, tribal geographic lines. So we have Nagaland around the Nagas, Mizoram around Mizo tribes. We have Tripura, we have got Hale, and Manipur. These are all tribal states, and each state is distinct in their ecology as well as in their culture. And so the government has made the states around their bioregions, so to say. If we take it in Assam, we have got Bodoland now around the Bodo tribe, and Jharkhand is another state which has come up around the tribals of that area. But we have got other very large states such as Madhya Pradesh. These are countryside states, or Uttar Pradesh and so on, where the concept of these bioregions could be played up in order to bring about more sensitivity to ecology and region, and thereby reap better results. Unfortunately, at this time, we are in a frenzy of infrastructure development, and I dread to, or rather, I feel, that a lot of things are going to be overwhelmed and destroyed. But I think timely recognition of the same can help influence, political decisions.
Thank you, Manu. And Nisha, what do you hope you can do with this report, or what are the next steps for you guys? Are you going to do more work on this aspect?
So actually, what we're now in the process, we just in fact just submitted the proposal for it. The main project is actually at a South Asia scale. So we're now taking steps to do this research to the other parts of South Asia, other countries. There are a lot of challenges to overcome because many of these boundaries are impossible to cross for some of us. So even having a meeting and things are very controversial things right now. But we have members from different countries within South Asia. And we are now, the next step would be to map all of South Asia to also see, can we approach different governments, different state governments, or subcommittees and things like that happen to, and use maybe the ecological, the climate disasters that are coming. It has been a year in the Himalayas of a lot of disaster. Only through bioregionalism we can solve it. So we are taking this approach of solutions and pathways rather than try and disturb it at a political level. And that's not our, so yeah, we're hoping that's the next step to expand it to the South Asia level.
Thank you. And I might just reflect, we have two questions from Matt. Thank you, Matt. I'll put them together. Can there be consistent governance across these bioregions? Because surely different human groups do different things. And I think the short answer from any of us would be yes, of course. That's in fact the point, that people do their own thing in different ways. But I'll let you address that difference. But also he's asked, just wondering if the idea of a bioregion is a bit stretched given the modern influences, which are partly colonial. And can the values of the natural and cultural aspects be championed by the different groups? So in a way, I think you've sort of answered some of that question, Nisha, by saying in a way, what you're trying to do is, I guess, promote awareness of the connectedness to nature, the diversity of nature, rather than go on a purely political agenda of thou shalt govern thyself in these boundaries. But Matt's question is, with all the diversity of how villages and different places look after themselves, perhaps the question that I'm trying to get to is, how are people responding to this information? Do you think that, in addition to what Manu said, other places are already governing themselves along their tribal lines? Do you think this information will help them with the governance side, or more to understand the environment?
I think, this part of the world, it's so much complexity and so much layers. So while there is a big top-down part of governance, which is what we see outwardly, there is also immense amount of grassroots movements and governance and systems happening. Like even at a political sort of official layer, there is the idea of a panchayat that still exists. So that is at the grassroots level. It is an ancient system that has now been integrated into India's framework of governance. where panchayat is at a village level. That originally it was 5 elders together govern, but now it is more structured and very, very formal and fitting into the larger system. But I would say yes, in many parts of at the grassroots, there's a very different reality. And in a country or a subcontinent of this scale, it's not so easy, though they are trying a lot with all the new technology and everything to bring this top-down control. But there's so much grassroots innovation, so much grassroots agency. And we see this, for example, when there's any kind of disaster, when there's a flood, when there's an earthquake, when there's COVID, we saw grassroots regional systems really emerging and depending on the kind of system in place or the kind of people who are in power, different ways of different levels of efficiency, different levels of accountability emerging. So yeah, I think that would be my answer, that we don't really need I think more than anything else, we just need to leave room for evolution and emergence from the grassroots. And I think there we see this sort of brilliance blooming.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I won't spend time on this, but someone did ask, how can we learn from this here in Australia? And I think that could be the topic of our first bioregioning webinar that we kick off in February, because I'm going to be inviting a number of people to reflect on the different mapping systems and tools we have in Australia. And Manu and Nisha, if you've never seen the several maps of Australia that show the Aboriginal language map, which elders call it the governance map, and then you look at the sub-region map or even the catchment maps, there's so much alignment with the Aboriginal governance system was very much focused on, you know, the unique places and then specific laws to look after those unique places. So I think here in Australia, certainly the same idea that Nisha and Manu have talked about, which is helping people remember or reconnect with what the living world tells us about a place, rather than just rely on this abstract notion of a political boundary. To me, I think that is one of the big opportunities of thinking bioregionally. So look, we're just about up to the 2 p.m. I wonder, Manu, if you'd like to share any of the forthcoming projects. With you were saying that you're now going to roll out to other parts of South Asia. Are there particular areas or boundaries that you'll be looking at next? What are you excited about?
Yeah, actually, there are 2 or 3 things I could say. One is, we need to complete the gaps in the present map. And that would be one exercise, and that would then extend beyond Indian boundaries. It would go into what is all of South Asia. That is one priority. Another priority is how to begin to take this to the decision makers and get some pilot projects discussed to start with, so that this idea can begin to take hold. That is the second idea. A third idea is that even in large cities, and I'll give you an example of Delhi. So the traditional Delhi, earlier there were 7 cities of Delhi. Oh. And then these layers have been overcome by the modern city. Okay, yet they exist within the urban fabric. And each of these cities, those which have survived, they have a culture of their own. So Shahjahanabad, the old Mughal city, that has a distinct culture. Karol Bagh has a different commercial culture. Mehrauli, another city on the southern ridge, that has a different culture. And the colonial city, which is full of administrators who are ruling the roost, they have a different culture, and so on. So even within large cities, there are interesting differentiations, but these may not necessarily be bioregions, but it was just a thought which struck me.
Right. Oh, that's exciting. That's terrific. Yeah. The idea of a city having these pockets of different cultural origins is quite wonderful, the way they all join up. Look, we're just about out of time. There's a couple of terrific questions, but I think I will promise that we'll have Nisha and Manu back next year and we'll get an update on the project that they're working on. And there's some really important questions here about, have you given thought to the political pushback and the pushback you get from people working together? Sorry if this sounds a bit pessimistic, but it really is the key question, isn't it? I was talking to a koala group just recently and they get very sad about how other koala groups often don't work together very well. Everyone's busy in their own world. How we bring people together to make the kinds of change, well, that's, I think, the topic for some more discussions next year. But On that note, Manu and Nisha, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. And may I invite everyone to say thank you in the traditional way on Zoom, either with a daggy air clap or some little presser buttons with emojis. But thank you for your time. I'm really excited by this project and look forward to staying in touch and learning more about it next year. So thank you. Thanks, lovelies. And for those interested, please keep an eye on the AELA website. We'll be having a heap more fabulous webinars and discussions next year. And lots of our wonderful speakers over the past 2 years will be back for updates, and we'll get some new folks as well. We're fascinated by bioregioning. We're passionate about what it can do in Australia by building on ancient wisdom and building a very different looking future, we hope. So on that note, thanks again, and we'll see you very soon. Bye.